My name is Lacey Leone McLaughlin. This is Unfolding Leadership, and I'm happy to introduce Shannon Dill. Shannon's an award-winning producer with 20 years of experience in feature documentaries and nonfiction series. She recently won an Oscar for her work in Free Solo, has worked on many other critically acclaimed documentaries, including He Named Me Malala, Grammy Winning FOO FIGHTERS, Back and Forth, Emmy Winning INHERETIANCE, Academy Award nominated Time, Emmy Winning Boys State, among many, many others. She is an active member of the Producing Council of the Producers Guild of America, the British Academy of Film and TV Arts, and Women in Film. So many accolades, so many experiences, and leadership stories to boot. I can't wait to jump in. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm so thrilled that you're here. Talk to me a little bit about how you ended up where you are today.
I had a really good friend who was close to director James Mall, and he was looking for an assistant. And I was out of college and been working my sort of fine art career, not liking the waiting tables, working for tips, trying to do, have my own studio practice, and said, why not? I'll work on this film with him and kind of see what it's all about. And it was a feature documentary called Price for Peace with Stephen Ambrose that Steven Spielberg was producing out of DreamWorks and Amblin. So it was like my first entry into sort of high value, high level filmmaking. And the stakes were pretty high. So it was either sink or swim, and I swam. And in that process, I really fell in love with the collaborative spirit of filmmaking and also nonfiction. It's sort of your fly on the wall of people telling these deeply personal stories, being very vulnerable, and sharing things that they don't even share with their family. So it felt like a privileged place to be. And I was an assistant. So I really was working on a lot of different things, seeing a lot of different of the directing and producing process, and just kept working from there with the same director for several years, and then sort of moving on to other projects. But that was sort of my entry level position and how I came to feature documentaries.
Yeah. So I'm curious, huge names, legendary individuals in the field, in a variety of spaces. When you think back to that first experience, are there any lessons of leadership or how they showed up that stick with you today? Both good and bad. Good. The good part was, I think, they took a chance on me. I was very eager and willing to, work as hard as what was needed to accomplish the job. And so I was given a lot of responsibilities, and I figured them out. And if somebody was looking for somebody, that came with the full resume, they wouldn't have chosen me. So I'm very grateful to that experience, and also learning that to not always look at somebody on paper, look at where they've been, but also look at them for their potential. So hiring people who are looking for talent, it's sort of trying to see the potential as well as what they're bringing to the table in that moment. That was a good lesson for me that I feel like I've tried to pay forward a bit, Well, what did you think you brought to the table?
Let's see. Well, hard work and knowing that I was there to support. It wasn't necessarily about me. It was about the team. So I was there to support the director, support the producer, and I understood, I think, that what they needed, and me just trying to fulfill that role and not necessarily I wasn't trying to be there just for myself. I was really wanting to be part of the collective.
So how do you think that all translates to the work that you did in starting a studio? And then how does that all translate to the work that you do producing and bringing groups of people together to create this art?
Well, I have learned that I'm not afraid to jump in. When Davis was starting the studio, I was very excited at the opportunity and was just said yes. And, I'm all in. And then you have to figure it out. And a good lesson was, I think, you're as good as your team, right? Everyone serves a purpose and everyone has a role, and everyone needs to fulfill that role, because even if your role is something that may seem to the outside world as insignificant, within that team, it is very important because everybody is connected. And if one person isn't showing up and doing everything they can, that trickles into everybody else. And there's no way around that. You spend more time with people you work with, I find, than sometimes your own family.
Yeah.
So, if there's any issues or any concerns, you have to dig in and figure them out, and be able to kind of be vulnerable and move on when you need to,
Yeah. Yeah. So producing, leading, work at studios is all huge work. They're massive ships that you've been steering throughout your last 20 years of your career. And clearly there's no handbook in how we do these things. Can often look glamorous when you see the output, but the road is bumpy. And I'll add to that, if you don't mind me sharing, but you're a working mother. You're a female, a woman in Hollywood in general. And a lot of times you're the boss and the leader. How do you reconcile all those things? It sounds like a lot from where I'm sitting.
It is a lot. I think anyone who says it isn't a lot is not being completely honest. COVID has been a big disruptor for everybody, including myself. And I think having a toddler during that time of remote working and virtual leading was extremely tough. And burnout can be real. And taking breaks and being still was what really helped me.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned virtual leadership. What has that looked like for you for the last, 2.5 years at this point, right?
Yeah. I miss human connection.
People aren't so bad, right?
People aren't so bad. And, my personality is I'm an introvert. So I pick up nonverbal cues in the room. That's how I relate to people. That's how I sort of gather, the energy, the vibe of something. And that's really tough in these Zoom meetings. And I've learned to keep the Zoom meetings smaller, not try to have these huge meetings where then usually one or two people end up being the big voices, because everyone else, it's like you can't really track. You don't know who's supposed to be saying what when, and that's been helpful in this virtual space. But I do miss, being in the room together, especially creatively. It's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned that you're more on the introverted side, which makes sense. But in this space, that tends not to be what we see most often. It tends to be really big personalities and a lot of, like a lot of charisma and a lot of excitement and all of those things. How has sort of your laid back approach, sort of your introverted nature, and I've seen this firsthand, your sort of ability to sit, observe, and help guide, really benefited you, because there aren't a huge amount of leaders out there that sort of share those same tendencies with you in your space?
Yeah, there's been a learning curve, definitely. And I had somebody, I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I think. And it was sort of like a therapist coach type person, coming out of a period. And she was a lifeline for me. And she told me, she's like, your style of leadership and what it looks like for you to lead is going to be very different than what the world perceives as needed. And it was almost like a permission for me to understand and accept that about myself, and know that when I get in situations where I'm starting to relate to colleagues, that they want that more, I don't want to call it stereotypical, but that
there's just a difference of more of that booming type, takeover kind of leadership style. That is not me. And if that's what they're looking for, then it's not a right fit. I think that helped me early on, having that voice and that sort of sage advice about myself, and knowing that it's not about conforming, but about sort of creating your own space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would even say leveraging, right? Like leveraging what you do that's unique and brilliant and brings people together. Yeah. The competence and the confidence, talking to you right now is like clear as day. Like, it's like no nonsense. I know how I show up. I know the value I bring to a team and the good I put out into the world. Our listeners, I'm guessing, are like, how the heck do I get there? Like, how do I get to that point where I just know who I am and I know how I show up and I know all of those things? And I would just love to share any sort of lessons learned, things people should be thinking about to get to this place of confidence and competence. What can you say to our listeners about that? I know it's an easy question, right? Like super easy.
I know. It's funny. I love listening to these podcasts, but I've never participated in one where I'm.
Well, see, that's the problem. We need more of that, right?
I know. In the prep work that you sent, there was one thing that came out for me that I kept coming back to and I remember this from art school too, from college days. And it's like being okay with failing and succeeding at the same time. You know, knowing that if there's a failure or you didn't succeed at something, you learned from it, you got somewhere else, you're moving forward. And so there's a success to it, you know, and if your ego can handle that, you know, it keeps you, it kind of drives you, because I love a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And if I haven't done something, it doesn't mean I can't figure out how to do it. You know, that I think was something I love about producing in itself.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, and parenting and all, you know, there's no handbook for anything.
No ego there.
So you just have to be comfortable feeling uncomfortable. You know? And know that if you're there for the good of the whole, you know, for the good of, you know, everybody and facilitating everybody, then your intentions are right. And at some point you just got to trust that process.
So you've talked a lot about your work on films and documentary and so on, but you've also spent some time in really big leadership roles within different organizations, creating studio, all of those things. How does leading on a film feel different to you than leading in a studio, a large team trying to build and grow something?
Yeah, the difference there, and I feel I learned it the hard way a bit. On projects, there's a beginning, middle, and an end. You know, it's like development to launch, you know, and that's usually a sprint. It's usually, you know, there's a container for it of how much, you know, how many years that takes. And I pace myself for that. And I know what the teams are needed throughout each phase, and the ebb and flow and the expansion and subtraction of that. On more of like a company or studio foundational level, that's a marathon. And if I treated it like a sprint, which I did initially when I enter some of those dynamics, it doesn't work the same way. Really, I do need to think of it as the marathon, and it's a different pacing, and the team doesn't necessarily expand and contract. It's your team. You know, it's even within the leadership team, it's the same leadership team. So there is that.
So what you're saying is you don't get to go away. There's no end.
You don't get to go away, and it becomes your, you know, who you are, and your name is attached to that organization, and it's just a different relationship.
Yeah.
And I've had the history of working with specific filmmakers for extended periods of time, so I like both. You know, I like investing in a company and doing multiple things. And I love the energy of that. But I also love to sort of toil, like, leave me alone, let me toil. Let me just get the job done, and sometimes the dynamics are where it's not necessarily the leaving alone. You're bridging constant communications as well as your team and the other leadership teams. And then, whoever you're serving, whoever your financier is, and all of that.
Yeah. So when you think about the corporate environment, top 3 lessons that you've learned working in that structure.
Top 3 lessons. Pace yourself.
Okay.
Pace yourself. Always know what your short-term and long-term goals are.
Okay.
And trusting your gut. So trust my gut. If things start becoming a red flag, they usually don't change unless something changes.
Got it.
So if the players are the same, if the scenarios are the same, most likely it's not going to change. Trust your gut. What do you need to do? Either to pivot, shift, fall back on those instincts and being able to make decisions wisely.
So how do you move the business forward differently? Yeah. Okay. Small team, top 3 lessons that you've learned there in that environment.
Small team. Okay. Everyone matters, like every job. I don't care how small it may seem. Small things, keeping the connection, having compassion for what everybody is doing. And I think assemble the right people and then get out of their way.
Let them do the work.
Let them do it. Be a part of it, but don't, micromanage. If you're micromanaging, then there's a problem.
Yeah. Got it. That's excellent. And there's a lot of overlap there, but you can tell that the nuance is different, right? Big corporate structure. It's how do we stay aligned with the strategy? How do we make sure we're working towards the same goal? And it comes down to creating that community, creating that trust, creating that group of people that can get anything done, which is needed in a large organization as well. But there's process and systems and structure in place to make sure it happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. So we think back to you finishing art school, starting this first job, probably being a little starstruck, because I know I would be if that group of people working on that film. How would you describe yourself? How did you show up 20 years ago?
Optimistic. I was very optimistic. Very much like, what can I do? Yeah. What do you need? What can I do? How can I help you?
So eager.
Very eager. Yeah. And hungry. You know what I mean? Like, kind of passionate about, like, where do I want to be? Where's my place in the world? Like, how am I going to find value and meaning in the work I do? And it was so instant in that moment of like, oh, wow. Sharing your story, from a personal level into the public sphere is important. And it helps us all, relate and understand. And it was and with team I could sort of learn from, it was just such an amazing opportunity. Yeah.
Okay.
And to see people at that level, like, and to see how engaging and open they were to me, it was just a big lesson too, of like, oh, that's security, that's sort of confidence. That's,
Yeah. When we think about you today, studio leader, production leader, depending on where you're at and what you're working on, what describes you? What are the leadership characteristics that describe you today?
Well, a word I would say is intentional. I think I'm, before I felt like, okay, you're laying the foundation, you're laying the ground. Right now I'm sort of walking a path, and I'm able to sort of choose more of what I say yes to and what I say no to. And that's a great place to be, I think, for myself right now. And it does help me. Being able to choose for myself helps me be more intentional about what's next. What do I want to spend the next few years doing? Who do I want to spend that with? All of those questions I can answer for myself. And I appreciate being in this place today.
Yeah. And how does that translate to you as a leader of people?
I think, well, I'm able to make decisions quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think is really key, that I understand more now what an asset that is, to be able to, in the moment, make a decision. It could be wrong, it could be right, but you're willing to make it, stand behind it. And if it's wrong, then you learn from it and you move on faster. I think having hesitation in that can be a detriment to a team. And as a leader, you owe it to your team to be able to to do that. It helps them do their job, and it helps you be able not stay stuck,
Yeah. Yeah. Hearing you say that, knowing what you've worked on, that sounds kind of scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where have you made a decision and it's gone really, really wrong? And where have you made a decision and it's gone really, really right on productions or departments that you've led, or things that you've done with teams?
I feel like I've had more rights than wrongs, which I feel fortunate. And for myself, it's an educated decision making. So if I don't know, I do ask for help. I think I understand more about, the coaching consulting world, and having that third party that's objective.
Yeah.
So valuable. And as a leader, if you're not willing to ask for help, that's not a great sign, right?
Yeah.
You need it.
Yeah. So I love that you've talked about your career in sort of the early days, and then today where you're at, and even having the choice to decide what you want to do, who you do it with, which is the dream for most, right? If you are talking to somebody who just finished their degree, going out into the world, regardless of industry, what would your advice be to them?
Say yes. Just really open yourself up to saying yes to anything that interests you.
Mm-hmm.
And don't worry about what necessarily if it's leading to the next step or whatever the outcome is, because you may not know. You don't know what you don't know, right? So if it's interesting and you're saying yes, and you're willing to put yourself out there, it's going to lead somewhere probably pretty great that you don't know it's going to lead you yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's interesting. I work with a lot of college students, and I get people reaching out to me often for, hey, I know you do this work. And there's just so much structure. Here's my plan. Here's where I'm going to start. Here's what I'm going to do next, and so on and so forth. And I hear you saying, like, maybe let some of that go.
Right or wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I tend to agree. And I'm always blown back. I was like, man, wish I would have had that plan at 22.
That's true too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I was never that person. I think I didn't have a lot of exposure to a lot of different things, growing up. So I knew I wanted that, and I knew I knew I didn't know about a lot of things. So you just kind of have to get out there.
Yeah. Okay. So switching pages, if somebody's listening, they've been leading for 20 years. They've been in the corporate environment for 20 years, or making and creating something for 20 years. What's your advice to them?
Oh boy. That's a good question. I don't know, because if they're loving what they're doing and it's working, like, you just keep doing that. If it's not working, then I say, don't be afraid to change.
Yeah.
I think, especially now, what's exciting about the whole work dynamic is changing, right? It's like evolving, and the whole reckoning of inclusion and all of that is very exciting. And also, I think it's exciting that we are working longer. So, like, I even have some personal friends who have gone back to school. They're late 40s and, early 50s, and they're making a total shift in career path. And they have, 20 years of experience in something else, and their interests are now this, and they're going to, pursue that. And I just think that's pretty inspiring as well, because taking what you have known as a person in the work, atmosphere for that long, and then going into something else, It's exciting, but very brave.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that because it feels like there's so much more of an appetite for that now than there ever was. And an ability to take that risk more today than there ever was. So it's fascinating where that's all coming from. What do you think the COVID related component is to that? Or is there?
I do. I think for me anyway, and I can really speak personally and from my peers, the hamster wheel stopped for a moment. Like, so that white noise and that sort of, I don't know, it just stopped. And there was a balance, especially for a lot of working women, the mental loads that happened of trying to, within your home environment with kids, if you have them, that needed to be leveraged in a different way. And then your work life. And if you're trying to do all of that, and, I know that for a lot of my girlfriends, it's like, you're the one tracking all those lists. You're the ones even asking your partner or spouse, make sure you get this done. And all of that sort of piled and piled. And I know, that moment of, okay, I'm not in the car for 2 hours anymore, in LA, and if you're commuting, and I'm not having to, show up for this, or it lessened your time of even just getting to someplace or dressing for something, presentation wise, it was different. How our lives were imploded, both professionally and domestically, I think just it opened up something that people were looking at it going, okay, how am I spending my time? How have I been spending my time? What do I want next? Because it's you can work remotely. For production wise, it just opened up the talent pools because before you'd have to, okay, where do you live? Where can you come to this location for a year? And now it's like, I can hire somebody anywhere if they're willing to work those hours. And it sort of opened up that. So that was one of the positives of it. But I think the stillness of not being able to, go out, changing your travel, like all of that just sort of stopped was so unusual, that it created a moment for people.
Yeah. So if I'm not prying, and if I am, feel free to move me forward. But if I'm not prying, when the white noise stopped for you, what was your biggest aha?
That I was really bad at balancing work and life. I was doing a poor job of it. And pretty much, I think if it hadn't happened, I could have seen myself still be trying to keep up with that pace and probably failing at something, but likely my brain, sort of that self-care was sort of last. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I see how I'm a much better person. I'm a much better person at work. I'm a much better person in the family if I have that time to kind of reflect and make sure that I'm taking care of myself.
Yeah. So just so our audience is clear, because I think they'll benefit from this, because I think a lot of people still aren't figuring this out or haven't figured this out or in the process of figuring it out. What are one or two things you're actually doing differently?
This is getting really personal, but I'm sleeping more.
Hey, turns out people need to sleep.
Yes. And I understand that science of that. I'm reading stuff about it and I'm like, oh, it just, your brain works better. And I realize that time management wise, I can, especially with doing the virtual remote work.
Yeah.
I'm in the car, I'm in transit less. So I can do other things more, do things that I wouldn't have been able to do. And part of that is, the personal regime of exercise, sleep, cooking your food so you're not eating, takeout all the time.
Yeah. That's great. I love the competence and the confidence. I don't think there's any better advice than sleep, right? And just the balance between being a working mother, leader, executive, producer, all of these things. So just so many lessons there. But for our listeners, to sum it up, any final thoughts, words of wisdoms, things that people should be thinking about as we wrap up?
What I can give is that to really embrace one size does not fit all. You know, in leadership, in anything. So, and I feel like that's what's happening sort of in these next generations of talking about inclusion, you know, stepping outside your box, not hiring the people that, you know, look and feel like you and have your same lived experience, you know, just understand that diversity makes everything better, you know, in terms of the team you have, people in your life, all of it. And one size doesn't fit all for leaders, and be open to allowing people that space, you know, and people claiming that space.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great note to leave everybody on. Diversity of thought matters, being open, and kind of going from there. It's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that our listeners are going to find this impactful. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing what's in the news as this project becomes more available.
Thank you, and it's great to connect with you.
Thanks, Shannon. What I'm left with is thinking about the white noise. What have we all learned from the stillness that came from COVID, when we were sitting at home, working from home, rather than in our cars commuting? What changes did we make? What changes do we want to embrace and continue to make so we can all achieve that balance that we each strive for? This is episode 11. Thanks for listening.